Charlotte, North Carolina. This is Democracy Now! Breaking with Convention, War, Peace, and the Presidency. We're broadcasting from the Democratic National Convention, inside and out.
We're going to organize and we're going to fight back, and that people feel really frustrated and rejected by the political system, that politicians of both parties aren't doing anything to represent the interests of people, and at the end of the day are representing the interests of these same banks and corporations right here in Charlotte.
March on Wall Street South. As the Democratic National Convention opens, about 1,500 protesters march in Charlotte. They're protesting President Obama's ties to the banking industry, the record number of deportations, and the secret drone war overseas. We'll hear voices from the streets. Then the fight over voting rights here in North Carolina.
President Obama didn't win on Election Day. Where he won was in same-day registration, early voting, a victory that was won by a broad-based civil rights, labor, and faith coalition. It was there that you had massive turnout, and that is why ultra-conservatives so want to roll back these voting rights, so want to bring voter ID.
The Reverend Dr. William Barber, head of the North Carolina NAACP, on voting rights and the fight for civil rights in the Tar Heel state, from the 1898 coup in Wilmington to the 1960 sit-ins in Greensboro and Charlotte to what's happening today. Then Valdemar Velasquez of FLOC, the Farm Labor Organizing Committee. He's an Ohio delegate at the Democratic National Convention, has been organizing migrant workers since he worked with Dr. Martin Luther King in the 1960s.
How could we as poor people who have nothing, we have no power, we have no money, how can we compel the world's largest, richest corporations to sit down and negotiate with us? I'll never forget his response that night. He says, when you impede the rich man's ability to make money, anything is negotiable.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, Breaking with Convention. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting from Charlotte, North Carolina. At least 13 people have been killed in U.S. drone strikes in Pakistan and in Yemen. The Yemeni government says 8 militants were killed in an eastern region on Friday, while Pakistani officials say 5 people died in a drone attack the following day. At least 3 people were killed in Pakistan Monday when a suicide bomber struck a U.S. consular vehicle in the city of Peshawar. 2 U.S. embassy staffers were also wounded in the attack. An appeals court in Bahrain has upheld the conviction of 20 activists on allegations of plotting to overthrow the U.S.-backed regime. The activists were sentenced by a military court last year, 8 of them to life behind bars. The ruling comes days after tens of thousands of people rallied against the monarchy in the country's first authorized demonstration in over a month. Protesters held up the pictures of a number of jailed Bahraini activists, including the Bahrain Center for Human Rights' Nabil Rajab, recently sentenced to 3 years in prison. The U.S.-led NATO occupation in Afghanistan has suspended training of Afghan local police and special operations forces following a relentless spate of attacks on international soldiers. The training will be suspended for at least a month to root out alleged infiltrators from militant groups. The suspension does not apply to the bulk of Afghan forces on the national level. Speaking in Belgium, NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen said Afghan militants will not derail the occupation's mission in Afghanistan.
Don't forget that for the Taliban, it's impossible to win militarily, but they try to gain some PR by undermining trust and confidence between the foreign troops and Afghan security forces. So obviously I will not exclude the possibility that the Taliban try to infiltrate the Afghan security forces. But once again, they will not succeed in derailing our strategy.
In other news from Afghanistan, 6 civilians were killed Saturday in a suicide bombing on a NATO base in Wardak province. No NATO troops were harmed in the attack. The death toll from Hurricane Isaac's battering of the Gulf Coast last week stands at 6 in Louisiana and 2 in neighboring Mississippi, with both states enduring massive flooding. Ahead of the Democratic National Convention, President Obama toured damaged areas on Monday.
As you can see, folks are on the ground already clearing out the debris and making sure that they're able to recover as rapidly as possible. I want to particularly thank FEMA and the state and local authorities because sometimes in the past we haven't seen the kind of coordination that is necessary in response to these kinds of disasters. This time we've seen it.
Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney returned to the campaign trail over the weekend after formally accepting his party's nomination last week in Tampa. Speaking in the battleground state of Ohio, Romney attacked President Obama's record on jobs while making an apparent attempt to distance himself from the last Republican president, George W. Bush.
He was going to create more jobs. And today, 23 million people are out of work or stopped looking for work or underemployed. Let me tell you, if you have a coach that's 0 and 23 million, you say it's time to get a new coach. We're going to finally have to do something that Republicans have spoken about for a long time, and for a while, we didn't do it. When we had the lead, we let people down. We need to make sure we don't lead them down this time. I will cut the deficit and get us on track to a balanced budget.
A federal judge has struck down Ohio's effort to prevent early voting the weekend before the election. Ohio's Republican-controlled legislature had barred early weekend voting, claiming state officials need the time to prepare for Election Day. But on Friday, a U.S. District Court ruled the state has failed to provide a convincing argument. Democrats have accused Republicans of seeking to block early voting in a bid to disenfranchise those likely to cast their ballots for President Obama. Ohio's Republican Attorney General says he plans to appeal top Republican strategist Karl Rove, Top Republican strategist Karl Rove has apologized to Missouri Congressmember and Senate candidate Todd Akin after joking Akin might be, quote, found mysteriously murdered. Todd Akin drew widespread condemnation and calls to drop out of the Senate race after suggesting it was rare for women to get pregnant from what he termed legitimate rape. Last week, a reporter from Bloomberg Businessweek, who attended an exclusive briefing with Karl Rove on the final day of the Republican National Convention, quoted the influential strategist saying, "We should sink Todd Akin. If he's found mysteriously murdered, don't look for my whereabouts." During the elite fundraiser, Karl Rove also laid out his strategy for winning the 2012 presidential election, at one point saying the people the Republicans need to win over had previously voted for Obama. And in Chicago, some 18,000 teachers and their supporters rallied on Labor Day ahead of a possible strike next week that could see more than 26,000 teachers and other school workers walk off the job. The Chicago Teachers Union's attempting to negotiate a fair contract with the nation's third-largest school district. The union remains concerned about issues including pay, a controversial new evaluation process for teachers, and the possible closure of as many as 100 schools. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. We're breaking with convention. War, peace, and the presidency. I'm Amy Goodman.